following message was recorded at Sha'arey Messianic Synagogue in Colorado Springs.
We've been going through, slowly, going through the book of Revelation. We took a break for a while, and now we're coming back to the book of Revelation a little bit. And a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to you on the book of Revelation specifically about the glory of Yeshua, how no one was able to open the scroll. There's a scroll with 7 seals, and no one was able to open the scroll. Let me take you back here a little bit. I'm going to give you just a quick recap. John's vision. John is on the island of Patmos, most likely because he has been banished by the Roman Emperor Domitian for not bowing before the emperor, for not acknowledging the emperor's divinity, at least in the emperor's mind. Domitian put statues of himself throughout the Roman Empire, and all was forced to bow. If they did not, then they were either executed or they were exiled. And that explains why John is exiled on the island of Patmos. There was a rabbinical question that was also asked amongst the early church. It was the same question: is it okay to to fix your sandals in front of an altar, before a pagan altar? And the reason they asked that is because, in other words, what they were saying is it okay if I go and just fix my sandals in front of the altar? In other words, is it okay if I look like I am bowing? I know that there's no other God but Him. But wouldn't it be okay if I just look like it so I don't have to suffer persecution? I'll just go and stand and I'll just fix my sandals. And the clear answer that the early leaders, the apostles gave, and the early leaders of the Messianic assembly and the rabbis gave was no. No, you cannot fix your sandals in front of an idol. So John was faced with that decision. Should I fix my sandals in front of an idol? And he said no. And he was exiled to Patmos. So John receives a vision when he's on the island of Patmos. He knows that his brethren are suffering tremendously at the hand of Domitian. And by all intent and purposes, it looks like Domitian is the king. It looks like he is the ruler. And who is going to overcome him? So John then receives a vision. And he's taken inside of the heavenly tabernacle, right? There's a heavenly tabernacle. It's also referred to as the throne room of God. He is king. But all of the holy items of the tabernacle are present there. So it is the heavenly tabernacle that God had shown Moses. And he says, I want you to make it just like you have seen, right? So we see that as John is taken into the heavenly tabernacle and he sees God sitting on his throne, and in his right hand, and the right hand means, in biblical interpretation, the right hand means strength. And in the right hand of God is a scroll. And the scroll has 7 seals on it, and no one can open the scroll. There is no way to open the scroll. In that scroll is the judgments that are about to be poured out upon the nations who have rebelled against God. And no one is able to open the scroll. And John then begins to weep terribly. And he begins to wonder, what are we going to do? It looks like all is lost. No one can open the scroll. And then suddenly, here comes what the scriptures refer to as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. The Lion of Judah comes to open the scroll. But it's interesting that when the Lion of Judah comes and opens the scroll, it changes text and refers to the lion as the Lamb. It says the Lamb of God was worthy to open the scroll. You see, it was not the strength of the lion, but the submission of the Lamb. The willingness of the Lamb to lay down his life as a sacrifice that made him worthy to open the scroll. So he begins to open the scroll. He begins to open the scroll. He opens off 1 seal at a time. There are 7 seals on the scroll. These 7 seals are 7 judgments They are actually the first part of 3 judgments. There are 3 sets of 7 judgments in the book of Revelation. The 7 seals are the first part. And as you read in Revelation 6, and that's what we're focusing here today primarily is in Revelation chapter 6, he begins to open the seals. And when he gets to the 7th seal, he opens the 7th seal. Within the 7th seal is 7 more judgments. Within the 7th seal is 7 more judgments. They are the 7 shofar blasts. And then the 7th shofar blast signals 7 more judgments. The 7 bowl judgments. So in all, there's 21 judgments that are fallen upon the earth. There's 3 sets of 7. It is important to remember as we look at the details. We look at some of the details in Revelation. It's important to remember that the details are generalizations that are not always really clear. They're not always really clear to us. And one of the dangers that we fall into is when Western theologians attempt to put meaning into the details, they often force their own meaning into the text based upon what they're going through, based upon what they see with their own eyes. They're forcing their own meaning into the text. And we've got to be careful about that. It's best to present the big picture of the book of Revelation and let God show us the details as we see them unfold. Let God show it instead of trying to force our interpretation on it. That being said, I'm going to extrapolate a little bit. And I'm going to throw out some possibilities, but I want to preface it by stating that these are only speculations, and in no way, shape, or form are they to be taken literally or to be assumed that we are seeing these things in our own day. In Matthew 24 and in Luke 21, the disciples of the Master come to him and they ask him the question. Actually, they ask him 3 questions, and one of those areas we get confused is that we assume that he's answering one question there, and he's actually answering 3 questions in the Olivet Discourse. They asked him, they said, so, Master, you have said that the temple will not be standing, not one stone will be left standing. When will this occur? When will the temple be destroyed? And then they asked him, because they assumed that they're going to be somehow linked together, that everything's going to happen rather quickly. And he corrects them on that. But then they asked him, they said, so when is going to be the sign of your return? When are you going to return? And when is going to be the signs of the end of the age? Now, my belief, and I could be wrong, but my belief is that Scripture is not always to be taken in chronological order. There are cases where it's clearly not in chronological order. And I think this may be one of those cases where it's not in chronological order because it is the believers were gathered together at the Mount of Olives, right? They were gathered together at the Mount of Olives to witness this. They had not expected the Master at this point to be sacrificed. They were surprised when it was. So why would they be asking him the question, when are you going to return at this point? My belief is that when the book of Matthew was originally written, when it was originally written in its Hebrew text, it was written to make it flow naturally, but not necessarily in chronological order. I believe these words are after the death and resurrection of the Master, just before his ascension, when he's standing on the Mount of Olives and he's about ready to be ascended. That would make perfect sense that they would ask him the question, when are you going to return? Nonetheless, it's speculation. So they asked him the question, when are you going to return? And when is going to be the sign of the end of the age? So he does not give specific details. Outside of a couple of things that we can look for. We know he says that he will gather together his people from the 4 corners of the earth. And we know he said that he will not return until Jerusalem says, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Outside of that, he doesn't give very much detail. He gives kind of broad stroke details. And he says to them, he says, here's what I want you to look out for. Be aware of these things and understand that these things already are occurring, but they're going to happen with increasing frequency. And he says, I want you to look out for wars. Be aware of them. Famine, earthquakes, pestilence, persecution, and celestial disorders. Now it's interesting to note that when we look at Revelation 6 and we look at the 7 seals that are on that scroll, every one of those things that the Lord said to look out for are within those 6 scrolls, within those 7 seals. Every one of them. So the Lord had already spoken to his disciples before John had his vision and said to look out for them. Well, in John's vision, he's seeing those things happen. Okay? Now let's go to Revelation 6, beginning of verse 1. I'm just going to read the first couple of verses, and I would encourage you as we go through this to go through this on your own. Read the scriptures on your own. Read the book of Revelation on your own. Come back ready, prepared to listen. And at the end, maybe even prepared to talk about it a little bit. Let's have a discussion about it. But nonetheless, in verse 1 it says, Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like thunder, Come. And I looked, and behold, a white horse. And its rider then had a bow and a crown, and was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. The first 4 seals on this scroll, the first 4 seals are what is traditionally referred to as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? Scholars have debated for centuries the meaning of these 4 horsemen. If you go to the high church, Presbyterian, Catholic Church, and Anglican Church, or what have you, it's traditionally because they come from more of a all-millennialist perspective. It's traditionally interpreted as events that have already happened during the time of the Roman occupation. I'm not an all-millennialist. I believe that certainly there were some things that were prophesied in Revelation that did occur, but the majority of it did not occur, and it is to come. And that being said, there has been great debate as to who the 4 horsemen are. You know, who are these 4 horsemen? Each color, and I think it can become a little bit clearer, not to the specific identities, but to what to look out for when we understand the Hebrew behind the text, the word picture there. Because remember, the book of Revelation is not a Western, it's not a Western fiction, okay? It's not a historical book. It is a 1st century apocalyptic book. It is an apocalyptic book, and you have to read it as an apocalyptic book, as part of apocalyptic literature. So it says, okay, let's look. Each color symbolizes the reality of judgment upon the earth. More important than even the riders on the horse is what the color of the horse symbolizes, because God is teaching something about that. We know, for example, the prophet Zechariah likewise saw colorful horses. They were in a slightly different setting, but he likewise saw colorful different horses, and he understood them to mean certain things. So the Lord is telling us here that when you see these colorful horses, they are symbolizing something. So let's look at those. We're only going to look at the first 2. We're going to look at the first 2, and we'll look at the next 2 next week a little bit. So the first rider John sees then is a white horse. John sees a white horse. The rider on this white horse is oftentimes assumed to be Yeshua. Some theologians interpret this white horse as being Yeshua because in Revelation 19, Yeshua is seen as riding on a white horse. So it is assumed that here is, the first horseman is Yeshua who's riding on a white horse. I don't believe this is the case. In the ancient Middle East, a white horse symbolized victory and conquering. The white horse, the first white horse that is found in Revelation 6, is a symbol of a leader who is coming to conquer the earth. He is the one who will begin. He will lead this, the upcoming judgment, or let me rephrase that, the upcoming time of the apocalypse. For a short time, this rider on a white horse in Revelation 6, he receives victory, which is why he is described as riding on a white horse. He has received victory, but his victory is short-lived. For the final victory is reserved for the King of Kings in Revelation 19. When Yeshua does return, he returns riding on a white horse, symbolic of victory and strength, who overcomes the first rider. The rider in Revelation 6 is said to have a bow and a crown. He has a bow and a crown. It is dangerous to speculate too much on who this rider is, but we can deduce that he is most likely, based upon the description of the white horse, he is most likely a political leader who has great military strength. He is a political leader with great military strength. Is he the Antichrist? While it is possible that the rider on the white horse is the Antichrist, it is my opinion that he is more likely the last of the false prophets. Again, it's pure speculation, but I believe he's most likely the last of the false prophets. The one who was to prepare the way for the Antichrist. Okay, just as the Antichrist is kind of in many ways a carbon copy of Yeshua, but a defiled carbon copy. Okay, he tries to mimic and copy. And just as John came on the scene to prepare the way for the coming of Yeshua, I believe that the rider on the white horse is a political leader who has great military strength, who has come to conquer and to prepare the way for the Antichrist. Nonetheless, it's speculation. He also, I believe, is the same beast from the sea that is described in Revelation 13. In Revelation 13, we find the beast from the earth and the beast from the sea, and I believe he's most likely the same beast from the sea. Here's a quick side note. Here is where one of the issues that when we study the book of Revelation, if we don't understand how apocalyptic literature works, we don't understand how Hebrew literature works, we're going to run into all sorts of issues. And this is one of the issues that people have when interpreting the book of Revelation. It's that the book of Revelation is not to be read in chronological order. Okay, it's clearly out of order in some cases. When we go to Revelation chapter 11 and 12, we find that it goes back some 2,000 years or more, depending on when the Lord returns, to the woman who was about to give birth, right? Who is that? That's clearly Israel. And the one that the enemy, the serpent, tried to snatch up is clearly Yeshua, and he was sent away. So obviously things are out of chronological order a little bit. And it's that way on purpose because it's teaching us something here. So we've got to be careful about trying to put things in chronological order. In fact, I believe the book of Revelation is best studied as it tells of the same events twice, but with a little bit different detail. We find that the book of Revelation, the end actually kind of takes place in around Revelation 12. And then it starts all over again. And it tells us the same events, it just tells us from a slightly different perspective. Just like in the book of Genesis, right? We know that there is the creation account in Genesis 1, and then it tells us about the creation account again in Genesis 2, right? And it's telling it from the same event, just from slightly different perspectives. And I believe the same thing is happening here. So Revelation 6 says the crown then, a crown, authority, kingship, is given to him. He doesn't take it. It is willingly given to him. This likely means that the nations of the world willingly accept him as their leader. Perhaps with the support of the world leaders, he is able to establish a type of world dictatorship, or what we would think of as a one world type government. As the world continues to become more chaotic, it is easy to see as things spiral out of control and somebody comes on the scene promising a lot, promising peace, promising prosperity. It's easy to see how people can get lured into that and willingly relinquish their sovereignty to a charismatic world leader full of promises of peace and prosperity. This phenomenon is found all over the world. People willingly submit their sovereignty, their own personal freedoms, their own responsibilities, so that they have the security of a promise of peace and food and a house. But these promises are weak and full of lies. Much like the promises of world leaders today, this rider on a white horse will offer a false world peace. I was listening to yesterday, there was an article on Drudge Report about the Mahmoud Abbas, the current head of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and he's the one world leaders are lifting up and saying he is the promise of peace. If we just get behind him, he will lead to peace in the Middle East. And yet, he just stated yesterday, when it was presented before him the possibility of a Palestinian state, the only thing Benjamin Netanyahu had asked for was that you have to recognize the right for the Jewish people to exist. And he refused. He says, I cannot and I will not do that. And yet this is a man who is lifted up as a symbol of peace. This is false peace. Nonetheless, I'll get off my soapbox. When we trust in the promises of world leaders and not in the promises of God, we will find that their promises are shallow and full of holes. In Jeremiah 6:14, it says, for from the least to the greatest of them, everyone is greedy for unjust gain, and from prophet to priest, everyone deals falsely. A couple chapters later in Jeremiah 8:11, it says, they have healed the wound of my people lightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. Does that sound familiar? Because world leaders will reject the rule of the one true God and His Lord, His Messiah, and His King, He will allow them to believe and accept the deceptions of a false prophet. If the people will not accept the truth, they will believe and accept the deceptions of a false prophet, of a liar. The second seal then is opened. The Messiah, the Lamb of God, opens the second seal. And when he opens the second seal, John looks and he sees a fiery red horse. And then John further states three things about this red horse. Now, I want you to see the contrast here. I want you to think about this for a moment, okay? The first one is this political leader who conquers, and he offers up this, people trust in him because he's offering up this false notion of peace and prosperity. If you just trust in me, and they willingly give their sovereignty over to him. And then John opens the second seal, and come out of the second seal is a red horse, a fiery red horse. And John says that he takes peace from the earth. See the deception? He takes peace from the earth. He causes people then to kill one another, and he is given a sword. In the ancient Middle East, a red horse was the symbol of war. So what John is saying is he saw war. He saw war. As spoken of by the Master in the Olivet Discourse, the rider of the red horse will cause wars in the last days that will escalate to the battle of Armageddon. In fact, the Master then tells us that unless those days are shortened, no one would be left alive, right? There will be no one left alive. So why, and it's an important question to ask, why do men war with one another? Why do men wage war? In the famous words of Rodney King, why can't we all just get along? Psalm 2 says this. It says, why do nations rage and peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against His anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. So here the psalmist tells us the first reason for man's war, the first reason that man wages war is because of the rebellion of man's heart. He doesn't wish to be under the sovereign rule of God, but he wants to be ruled by man. He wants to rebel against God. We reject the rule of God and desire to be ruled over ourselves, right? In 1 Samuel 8, Israel too rejected God as their king and wanted a king like all the other nations and said, give us a king, Samuel, like all the other nations. And in 1 Samuel 8:7 it says, and the Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. We have rejected God in favor of ruling over ourselves, and it is that rebellion that leads to war. In Deuteronomy, the second reason man makes war is the evil of man's heart to conquer and rule their neighbors. The evil of man's heart to conquer and rule their neighbors. I want you to think about this for a moment, okay? Just as God has set boundaries for the tribes of Israel, He set boundaries for Israel. He also set boundaries for the nations of the earth. Not just for Israel, but He said, I have set boundaries for the nations of the earth. And He tells us in Deuteronomy 32:8, it says, then the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance. And when He divided mankind, He fixed the borders of mankind according to the number of the sons of God. Now, what's interesting is that God said that He has established the boundaries of the nations according to the boundaries of Israel. In other words, if you want to have the boundaries of your nation established and respected, you have to respect the boundaries that I have given to my beloved people Israel. When nations seek to expand their boundaries beyond their allotted borders, war then is the result. The third reason man makes war is their desire to destroy God's covenant people, Israel. It's that simple. God's covenant people of Israel. The enemy hates His people. The enemy hates the sons and daughters of Israel, and he will do everything he can to destroy them. And that includes deceptions and lies through false prophets, through false teachers, through false leaders, through false political leaders. This is the primary reason for the rider of the red horse who makes war. The rider of the red horse in the second seal makes war because he desires to destroy Israel. He is an agent of the enemy who hates God's treasured people and desires her destruction. This anti-Semitic leader will hate God. He will hate Jews. He will hate Bible-believing Christians. He will hate Israel. And the reality is, and again, it's only speculation, but the reality is that we are ripe for the coming of the rider of the red horse, are we not? The nations of the world have raised their voice. Again, I remind you of the nations of the world who lift up leaders like Mahmoud Abbas, who refuses to acknowledge the right of Israel to even exist. And the nations gather around leaders like Mahmoud Abbas and lift him up and say, he is our leader. He is a great leader. He is the one who will bring peace, destruction to Israel, destruction to God's covenant people. The nations of the world today hate Israel. They hate the Jews. They hate the God of the Jews. And they hate those who come to the defense of His people. Dr. Richard Booker estimates that the next war between the Arabs and Israel may not be contained then to the Middle East. The prophet Ezekiel writes of a confederation of nations from the north who will come against Israel in the last days. Are these those days? I don't know. But it's something to think about. Certainly the time is right. Could the next war in the Middle East be that which is spoken by Ezekiel? And in fact, I believe Psalm 83 seems to be prophesying about this very event. In Psalm 83 it says, "O God, do not keep silent. Do not hold your peace or be still." We need to think about this for a moment. In light of current events and what Israel is going through right now, "O God, for behold, your enemies make an uproar. Those who hate you have raised their heads. They lay crafty plans against your people. They consult together against your treasured ones. They say, 'Come, let us wipe them out as a nation. Let the name of Israel be remembered no more.' For they conspire with one accord. Against you they make a covenant. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and Hagrites, the Gebel and Ammon and Amalek, Philistia and the inhabitants of Tyre, Ashur also has joined them. They are the strong arm of the children of Lot, Selah. And when you look at the peoples who are listed there, they are the people surrounding both the Middle East, from Iran to Turkey to Syria, up to Russia. Furthermore, we have seen for the first time a deepening alliance between Russia and a number of Islamic states such as Iran. This has brought to light, again, I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but it has brought to light the real possibility of such an attack against Israel, even within our own lifetime, possibly. So who is the rider on the white horse? I'm going to close here. Who is the rider on the white horse? Again, we must be careful about making assumptions. I don't know. The logical assumption in he is a military leader, but it's only a guess. He also could be, rather than taking the rider literally, as a literal rider, he could simply, the rider on the white horse could simply be a word picture of the military arm of the first leader, the rider on the white horse. The rider on the red horse could simply be the military arm of the rider on the white horse. But again, that's speculation. That's speculation. We won't know for certain until we see it happen. And if it happens in our days, I think we'll see it and it'll be obvious to us. If it doesn't happen in our days, we will see it happen from a much better place.
The message you have just heard was recorded at Sha'arey Messianic Synagogue in Colorado Springs. You can learn more about us at sha'areyzion.com. That's SHAREYTZION.com. If you have questions or want to contact us, please email us at thegatesofzion@hotmail.com. If you live in Colorado Springs or find yourself in the area, please stop by and visit with us. We have services every Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m. You can find us at 4680 Edison Avenue, Unit G, near the intersection of Platt and Wooten. Shalom, and thanks for listening.